It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon at Riverside Park. The sun was shining bright, and families were scattered across the green grass, enjoying their weekend. Children's laughter filled the air as they ran around the colorful playground equipment. The smell of barbecue drifted from nearby picnic tables. Where parents watched their kids play, Carol Henderson sat on her usual bench, the same spot she had claimed every weekend for the past 3 years. She considered herself a regular here, someone who knew the ins and outs of this neighborhood park. At 52 years old, Carol had strong opinions about how things should be done, especially in her community. She lived just 2 blocks away in a house she had owned for over 15 years, and she felt a sense of ownership over this little corner of the world. As she sipped her coffee from a travel mug, Carol noticed something that made her pause. Near the newer playground equipment, a young boy was playing alone. He looked to be about 8 or 9 years old, with a bright red backpack sitting beside him on a bench. The child seemed perfectly content, climbing on the monkey bars and testing his balance on the wobbling bridge. Carol squinted her eyes, trying to get a better look. She had never seen this boy before, and that bothered her. She knew most of the families who came to this park regularly. Mrs. Johnson with her twin daughters, the Martinez family with their 3 boys, old Mr. Peterson who walked his dog every morning. But this child? He was a stranger. The boy wore clean jeans and a blue t-shirt with some cartoon character on it. His sneakers looked new, and he carried himself with confidence as he played. There was nothing unusual about him, nothing that should have raised any red flags. But Carol felt uneasy. Something about the situation did not sit right with her. She watched for another 10 minutes, expecting to see a parent or guardian approach. Someone had to be watching this child, right? But as the minutes ticked by, no adult came forward to check on him. Carol's concern began to grow, though it was mixed with something else she could not quite name. Finally, Carol stood up from her bench. She smoothed down her light blue cardigan and walked purposefully toward the playground area. Her white tennis shoes made soft sounds on the rubber matting as she approached the boy, who was now sitting on a swing, gently pushing himself back and forth. "Excuse me," Carol called out in a voice that was louder than necessary. The boy looked up with curious brown eyes, pausing his swinging motion. "Hi," the child replied politely. Offering a small smile, Carol crossed her arms over her chest and looked around dramatically. "Where are your parents, honey?" "I do not see any adults with you," the boy pointed toward the parking area. "My dad is over there in his car. He is on an important phone call for work. He told me I could play here while he finishes up." Carol followed his gaze, but could not make out much from this distance. There were several cars in the parking lot, and she could not tell which one he meant. This explanation did not satisfy her growing suspicion. "Well, that does not seem very responsible," Carol said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "Children should not be left alone in public places like this. Anything could happen." The boy looked confused by her tone. "I am okay, ma'am. I am just playing on the swings. My dad can see me from where he is." But Carol was not convinced. She looked around at the other families in the park, noting how the parents stayed close to their children. Why was this boy different? Why was he here alone while his father sat in a car somewhere? "Listen, sweetie," Carol said, trying to sound caring but coming across as condescending instead. "This park is really meant for neighborhood families. People who live around here and know how to use it properly. Maybe you should find somewhere else to play today." The suggestion hung in the air like a dark cloud. The boy stopped swinging completely and stared at Carol with wide eyes. He could not understand why this woman was being so unfriendly when he had done nothing wrong. "But this is a public park," the boy said quietly. "Anyone can play here, right?" Carol's jaw tightened. She did not like being questioned by a child, especially one who seemed to know more about public park rules than she expected. Her frustration began to show more clearly. "Well, yes, technically," Carol said, emphasizing the word like it left a bad taste in her mouth. "But there are unwritten rules about these things. Community standards. This is a safe family area, and we like to keep it that way." Other park visitors were starting to notice the conversation. A woman pushing her toddler on a nearby swing glanced over with a frown. A man playing catch with his teenage son stopped, throwing the ball, and turned to watch what was happening. The boy felt the weight of all these eyes on him. His cheeks grew warm with embarrassment, even though he still did not understand what he had done wrong. He was just playing on the swings, waiting for his father like he had been told. "I think maybe you should call your father and ask him to come get you," Carol continued, her voice getting more insistent. "Or better yet, you should go wait in the car with him. This playground can get very busy on weekends, and we need the space for local children." The word local came out with extra emphasis, and several nearby parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. They could sense something was not right about this interaction, but no one was quite sure how to step in. The boy's shoulders slumped slightly. He was starting to feel scared and confused. All he wanted was to play on the swings while his dad finished his work call. He had not expected this strange woman to make him feel unwelcome in what was supposed to be a fun place. "My dad said he would come get me when he was done," the boy said, his voice smaller now. "I do not want to interrupt his important call." Carol pulled out her cell phone from her purse, holding it like a weapon. "Well, if your father cannot be bothered to supervise you properly, maybe I should call park security. Or better yet, maybe I should call someone who can help sort this whole situation out." The threat hung heavy in the afternoon air. The boy's eyes grew wide with fear, and several parents moved closer, their protective instincts kicking in. Something about this whole scene felt very wrong, and they were starting to realize they might be witnessing something more serious than a simple misunderstanding. Carol stood there with her phone in hand, feeling powerful and righteous, completely unaware that her actions were about to set in motion a chain of events that would change everything she thought she knew about this quiet neighborhood park. Carol held her phone up higher, making sure the boy could see it clearly. The device felt heavy in her hand, like a tool of authority that would finally solve this problem. She had made up her mind that this situation needed to be handled properly, and she was going to be the one to do it. "I am going to make some calls," Carol announced loudly, her voice carrying across the playground area. "There are rules about these things, and someone needs to enforce them." The boy looked up at her with growing alarm. His small hands gripped the swing chains tighter as he tried to understand why this woman was being so mean to him. He glanced toward the parking lot, hoping to catch sight of his father, but the cars were too far away to make out any details. "Please, ma'am," the boy said softly. "I am not doing anything wrong. I am just sitting on the swing." But Carol was no longer listening to his explanations. In her mind, she had already decided what kind of situation this was. She saw a child without proper supervision, and she saw what she believed was a lack of respect for community standards. Her imagination began to fill in details that were not really there. "This is exactly the problem," Carol said, more to herself than to the boy. "People think they can just show up anywhere and do whatever they want. No consideration for the families who actually belong here." A woman named Jennifer was pushing her 3-year-old daughter on a swing about 20 feet away. She had been watching the interaction with growing discomfort. Something about Carol's tone and body language made her feel uneasy. Jennifer pulled out her own phone, but instead of making a call, she quietly started recording a video. Carol noticed Jennifer's movement and mistook it for support. "Finally, someone else who cares about keeping this place safe," Carol said, walking over toward Jennifer. "You see what I mean, right? We cannot just let any random child wander around here unsupervised." Jennifer did not respond the way Carol expected. Instead, she kept recording and said, "I think the boy seems fine. He is just playing quietly." Carol's face flushed red. She was not used to being contradicted, especially when she felt so strongly that she was doing the right thing. "Fine? You think this is fine? What if something happens to him? What if he gets hurt? Who is going to be responsible then?" The boy could hear every word, and each comment made him feel smaller and more frightened. He wanted to run to his father's car, but Carol was standing between him and the parking lot. He felt trapped and did not know what to do. Another parent, a man named Robert who was watching his 2 sons climb on the jungle gym, started paying closer attention to what was happening. He could see that Carol was getting more agitated, and the boy looked scared. Robert also pulled out his phone and began recording from a different angle. Carol saw the second phone and felt a surge of confidence. She thought these parents were documenting the situation to support her concerns. Good, good, she said, nodding approvingly. We need to have evidence of these kinds of problems. The park department needs to know what is really going on here. She turned back to the boy with renewed energy. Now, I am going to call the proper authorities, and they are going to want to know some information. What is your name? Where exactly do you live? How did you get here today? The questions came rapid fire, and the boy felt overwhelmed. He had been taught not to give personal information to strangers, but this woman was so insistent and scary that he did not know how to respond. I do not think I'm supposed to tell strangers my address, the boy said quietly. Carol threw her hands up in exasperation. See? See what I mean? This child has no proper guidance. He does not even know how to answer simple questions from concerned adults. But Jennifer and Robert were seeing something completely different. They saw a young boy who was being smart about safety rules, not giving out personal information to someone he did not know. They saw a child who was being polite and respectful, even while being treated poorly. Ma'am, Jennifer said, stepping closer with her phone still recording, I think you might be misunderstanding the situation. The boy seems perfectly well behaved. Carol spun around to face Jennifer, her eyes blazing with anger. Misunderstanding? I have been coming to this park for years. I know how things are supposed to work here. I know what belongs and what does not belong. The words hung in the air, like a thunderclap. Several other parents stopped what they were doing and turned to stare. The emphasis Carol put on the word belong made everyone uncomfortable. It felt like she was saying something much bigger than just concern about an unattended child. Robert stepped forward too, his phone capturing everything. This is a public park, he said firmly. All children belong here as long as they are not causing trouble. Carol felt like she was being attacked from all sides. These people did not understand what she was trying to do. They were not seeing the bigger picture. In her mind, she was protecting the community, maintaining standards, keeping things the way they should be. You people do not get it, Carol said, her voice rising higher. This is not about being mean. This is about maintaining a safe, family-friendly environment. When parents do not take responsibility, when children are just dropped off wherever, it changes the whole character of a place. The boy was now openly crying, tears streaming down his cheeks as he sat frozen on the swing. The situation had spiraled so far beyond his understanding that he felt completely helpless. All he wanted was for his father to finish his phone call and come rescue him from this horrible woman. More parents were gathering now, drawn by the commotion. Some had their phones out, recording the scene from multiple angles. Others were whispering to each other, trying to figure out what was happening and how they should respond. Carol looked around at all the faces staring at her and felt even more determined to prove her point. She dialed a number on her phone, and everyone could hear it ringing on speaker. Yes, hello, Carol said when someone answered. I am at Riverside Park and I need to report an unattended minor. There is a child here with no adult supervision, and I am concerned for his safety and the safety of other families. The person on the other end of the line asked for more details, and Carol began describing the situation in her own words. But as she talked, painting the boy as some kind of problem that needed to be solved, the other parents exchanged looks of disbelief and disgust. They could all see what was really happening here. This was not about safety or supervision. This was about something much uglier, something that made them all feel ashamed to be witnessing it. And in the parking lot, completely unaware of the drama unfolding just a few hundred yards away, a man in a business suit was finishing up what would turn out to be the most important phone call of his career. Carol was still on the phone with what sounded like a park security office, describing the situation in increasingly dramatic terms. The boy sat on the swing, tears flowing freely down his cheeks as he watched this stranger try to get him in. Trouble for doing absolutely nothing wrong. Yes, that's right, Carol said into her phone, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. The child appears to be completely alone. No adult supervision whatsoever? I've been watching for over 20 minutes now, and nobody has come to check on him. Jennifer continued recording, shaking her head in disbelief. She had never seen an adult behave this way toward a child who was clearly doing nothing wrong. Robert was also capturing everything on his phone, making sure to get clear audio of Carol's phone conversation. The thing is, Carol continued to, the person on the phone, this kind of irresponsible behavior really affects the whole community. When parents just drop their kids off wherever they want without any consideration for the families who actually use this park regularly, it creates problems for everyone. The boy wiped his nose with his sleeve and looked desperately toward the parking lot. He could barely make out the shapes of cars through his tears, but he hoped with all his heart that his father would finish his call soon and come save him from this nightmare. More parents had gathered around now, forming a loose circle. Most of them had their phones out, documenting what they were witnessing. The mood was tense and uncomfortable. Everyone could sense that something was very wrong about this whole situation, but Carol seemed completely oblivious to the disapproval surrounding her. "Ma'am," said a woman named Lisa, who had just arrived with her twin boys, "what exactly is the problem here?" "The child looks fine to me." Carol ended her phone call and turned to address the growing crowd. She felt energized by what she saw as community involvement. In her mind, all these people with their phones were supporting her efforts to maintain park standards. "The problem," Carol said, speaking like she was addressing a town hall meeting, "is that we have standards in this neighborhood. We have expectations about how families behave in our community spaces. You cannot just abandon children in public areas and expect other people to deal with the consequences." "But he's not abandoned," said Robert, still recording. "He said his father is right over there in the parking lot." Carol waved her hand dismissively. "Anyone can say anything. Where's the proof? Where's the supervision? This child has been here, alone for almost half an hour now. That's not normal parenting behavior." As if summoned by her words, a figure began walking across the grass from the direction of the parking lot. It was a tall man in a dark business suit, carrying a phone in one hand and what looked like a tablet in the other. He moved with purpose and confidence, his polished dress shoes making soft sounds on the grass as he approached. The boy saw him first and let out a sob of relief. "Daddy!" he called out, jumping off the swing and starting to run toward the approaching figure. Carol turned to see what the boy was looking at, and her expression immediately hardened. Here was another person she didn't recognize, someone else who didn't belong in her vision of how this park should operate. The man reached the playground area and immediately knelt down to comfort his son, who threw his arms around his neck. "Hey, buddy, what's wrong? Why are you crying?" "This lady," the boy said between sniffles, "she's been really mean to me. She said I don't belong here, and she called someone on the phone to come take me away." The father's face grew serious as he stood up, still holding his son's hand. He was an impressive figure, tall, well-dressed, and carrying himself with the quiet authority of someone used to being in charge. His suit was expensive and perfectly tailored, and he wore the kind of watch that suggested both success and responsibility. Carol, however, was not impressed. She saw what she wanted to see, another person who didn't fit her narrow idea of who belonged in this space. "Well, it's about time," Carol said, crossing her arms and facing the man directly. "I've been trying to get someone to take responsibility for this child. Do you have any idea how long he's been here unsupervised?" The father looked at Carol with calm, measured eyes. "I'm sorry, who are you exactly?" "I'm Carol Henderson, and I've been a member of this community for 15 years, she said, as if that gave her some special authority. "I use this park regularly, and I care about maintaining safety standards for all the families here." "I see," the man said quietly. He glanced around at all the phones pointed in their direction, taking in the crowd of parents who had gathered. "And what exactly is the safety concern with my son playing on the swings?" Carol sensed an opportunity to educate this man about proper community behavior. The concern is about supervision and responsibility. Children shouldn't be left alone in public spaces. It's not fair to other families, and it's not safe for the child. My son wasn't alone, the father replied, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel underneath. I was taking a work call in my car, and I could see him the entire time. He knew exactly where I was. A work call, Carol repeated with obvious skepticism. Right. Well, maybe next time you should consider whether your work is more important than properly supervising your child in a public space. The crowd of parents exchanged glances. Carol's tone was becoming more condescending and inappropriate by the minute. Several people were shaking their heads in disgust at how she was speaking to this man. You know what? Carol continued, warming to her subject. This is exactly the kind of attitude that's destroying community standards. People think they can just do whatever they want, wherever they want, without any consideration for how it affects others. The father listened to this lecture with growing amazement. He had dealt with difficult people before in his professional life, but rarely had he encountered someone so completely oblivious to their own inappropriate behavior. Ma'am, he said, his voice still controlled but firm, I'm not sure what you think is happening here, but my son has every right to play in this park. This is a public facility, open to all members of the community. Carol let out a short, bitter laugh. Public facility, yes. But that doesn't mean anything goes. There are still community standards, unwritten rules about how things work in neighborhoods. Like this, she gestured broadly at the park around them. Maybe where you come from, it's normal to just drop kids off wherever and walk away. But that's not how we do things here. The father reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. From it, he extracted a business card and held it out toward Carol. You're absolutely right that community standards matter, he said. In fact, maintaining those standards is literally my job. Carol took the card without really looking at it, still focused on making her point. Well, good. Maybe you can talk to this child about appropriate behavior in community spaces. Maybe you can explain to him that... Her words trailed off as she finally looked down at the business card in her hand. Her eyes widened as she read the text, and all the color drained from her face. The card read, David Thompson, Director of Parks and Recreation, City of Riverside. Carol's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water as the full implications hit her. This man wasn't just any random parent. He was the person in charge of this entire park system. He was the official responsible for maintaining the very community standards she had been lecturing him about. The crowd of parents realized something significant had just happened. Even if they couldn't see the business card clearly, the shift in Carol's expression was dramatic and unmistakable. Carol started to say, then stopped. For the first time since this whole confrontation began, she was completely speechless. Carol stared at the business card in her trembling hand, reading the words over and over again as if they might change. Director of Parks and Recreation, City of Riverside? The title seemed to burn into her vision. This was impossible. This could not be happening. David Thompson watched her face cycle through shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. He had seen this kind of reaction before in his professional life, usually when people realized they had made a serious mistake in judgment. But rarely had he witnessed someone dig themselves quite this deep. I don't understand, Carol stammered, looking up from the card. You're really ... I'm really the person in charge of this park, David said calmly. The person responsible for maintaining those community standards you were so concerned about. The crowd of parents pressed closer, sensing that something dramatic had just unfolded. Jennifer, who had been recording the whole time, made sure her phone captured Carol's shocked expression and David's calm professionalism. But wait, Carol said, her voice getting higher and more desperate. I was just ... I was only trying to help. I was concerned about safety. That's all this was about. Safety. David glanced down at his son, who was still holding his hand tightly. The boy had stopped crying, but his eyes were red and his face was streaked with tears. Kevin, David said gently, why don't you tell me exactly what this lady said to you? Kevin looked up at his father with trust and relief. She said I didn't Belong here, Daddy. She said this park was for neighborhood families and I should go somewhere else. She said you were being irresponsible and that she was going to call the police. David's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained controlled. Did you do anything wrong? Were you bothering other children or being unsafe? No, Daddy, Kevin said firmly. I was just sitting on the swing waiting for you like you told me to. I didn't even talk to anybody until she came over. Carol's face went from pale to bright red. She was starting to realize that her own words, captured on multiple phones, had painted her into a corner she could not escape from. Look, Carol said, trying to regain some composure. I think there's been a misunderstanding here. I wasn't trying to be mean to your son. I was genuinely worried about a child being alone in the park. David turned to address the crowd of parents who had witnessed everything. Excuse me, did anyone here see my son behaving inappropriately or dangerously? A chorus of "no" came from the gathered parents. Jennifer stepped forward, still holding her phone. Actually, your son was being very polite and well-behaved the whole time. He was just sitting quietly on the swing. Robert nodded in agreement. The boy wasn't causing any problems at all. He seemed like a good kid just waiting for his dad. Carol felt the walls closing in around her. But he was alone, she insisted weakly. Children shouldn't be unsupervised in public places. David pulled out his own phone and opened an app. This is interesting, he said, showing the screen to Carol. This app shows exactly where I was parked. Car number 47 in the main lot. From that spot, I had a clear line of sight to the playground the entire time. He swiped to another screen. And this shows the duration of my phone call, 22 minutes. Kevin was never out of my sight for even a moment. Carol's mouth opened and closed as she tried to find words. Every excuse she had was crumbling under the weight of actual facts. Furthermore, David continued, his voice taking on a more professional tone, I was here today in an official capacity. This is one of several parks I'm inspecting this weekend as part of my new role. Kevin often comes with me on these visits because it helps me see our facilities from a family perspective. The irony was devastating. Carol had been lecturing the director of Parks and Recreation about park standards while he was literally conducting an official inspection of the facility. She claimed to care so much about Lisa. The woman with twin boys shook her head in disgust. So let me get this straight. You harassed a child and his father while they were here on official city business? It wasn't harassment, Carol protested desperately. I was trying to protect the community. I was trying to maintain standards. David looked at her with a mixture of disappointment and professional concern. Miss Henderson, I need you to understand something. In my position, I take community standards very seriously. And what I witnessed here today, an adult intimidating a child based on assumptions and prejudice, that goes against every standard we try to uphold in our public spaces. Carol's hands were shaking now. Prejudice? No, that's not what this was. I would have done the same thing for any child. Any child at all, would you? Asked Jennifer, holding up her phone, because I have the whole thing recorded. Your exact words, the way you spoke to this child, the assumptions you made. Robert nodded grimly. Same here. Everything's on video. Carol looked around desperately at all the phones pointed at her. You can single quotes to ... You can't put that online. That's not fair. I was just trying to do the right thing. David knelt down to Kevin's level again. Son, do you feel safe here in this park? I do now that you're here, Daddy, Kevin said softly. But that lady scared me. She made me feel like I had done something really bad, but I didn't know what. David stood up and looked directly at Carol. This is what community standards actually look like, Ms. Henderson. They look like treating all children with kindness and respect. They look like assuming the best about families, not the worst. They look like creating spaces where every child feels welcome and safe. Carol was crying now, ugly tears of embarrassment and fear. Please, she said, I made a mistake. I see that now. Can't we just forget this happened? A mistake? David's voice carried a note of steel. Ms. Henderson, you threatened to call the police on my 8-year-old son for playing on a swing. You told him he didn't belong in a public park that his father is literally responsible for maintaining. This wasn't a simple mistake. Jennifer stepped closer, her phone still recording. And you did it all while we were filming. Every word, every threat, every inappropriate comment. The weight of her actions was finally hitting Carol full force. This wasn't going to just disappear. These videos existed. Her behavior had been documented. And the man she had targeted wasn't just any random parent. He was a city official with the power to make her life very difficult. What are you going to do? Carol asked David, her voice barely above a whisper. David looked around at the gathered parents, then down at his son, then back at Carol. I'm going to do what I always do when there's a problem in one of our parks, Miss Henderson. I'm going to make sure it gets properly addressed. The crowd of parents began to murmur among themselves, some already uploading videos to social media, others discussing what they had just witnessed. Carol stood in the middle of it all, finally understanding that her attempt to control who belonged in her park had backfired in the worst possible way. Kevin tugged on his father's sleeve. Daddy, can we go home now? I don't want to play here anymore today. David squeezed his son's hand gently. Of course we can, buddy. But first, I think some people here owe you an apology. All eyes turned to Carol, who stood frozen in place, finally realizing that her world was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. Carol stood frozen in the middle of the playground, watching David walk away with Kevin toward the parking lot. The gathered parents slowly began to disperse, but many of them were already busy on their phones. She could see them tapping and swiping, and her stomach dropped as she realized what was happening. Jennifer was the first to post. She uploaded her video to her neighborhood Facebook group with a simple caption. This happened at Riverside Park today. Please watch and share your thoughts. Within minutes, the comments started pouring in. Friends and neighbors who recognized. Carol began expressing shock and disappointment. Robert posted his video to Twitter, adding, "When you assume the worst about people, sometimes you end up looking like this." The man she's lecturing turned out to be the parks director. His post started getting retweets immediately. Lisa shared her recording to Instagram, where it quickly gained traction among local parenting groups. The story was spreading faster than Carol could have imagined possible. By Sunday morning, less than 24 hours after the incident, Carol's phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. Friends were calling, texting, and sending her links to various social media posts. The videos had been shared hundreds of times across different platforms. Her neighbor texted, "Carol, is this really you in this video? I can't believe what I'm seeing." Her sister called from 2 states away. "Carol, what were you thinking? This video is everywhere. My friends are sending it to me." But the worst call came Monday morning at 8:30 a.m. It was her boss, Patricia, from Henderson Real Estate, the family-owned company where Carol had worked for 8 years. "Carol, we need to talk. Can you come in early today?" Patricia's voice was cold and professional in a way Carol had never heard before. When Carol arrived at the office, Patricia was waiting with a tablet in her hands. On the screen was the video of Carol confronting Kevin and David at the park. "Sit down," Patricia said quietly. "We've received 14 phone calls since this weekend. Clients, potential clients, and community members. They're all asking about our company's values and whether we support the behavior shown in this video." Carol felt her world spinning. "Patricia, I can explain. It wasn't what it looked like. I was just concerned about a child's safety." Patricia pressed play on the video, and Carol had to watch herself telling Kevin that the park was for neighborhood families and that he should find somewhere else to play. Hearing her own words played back was devastating. "Carol," Patricia said after the video ended, "our company sells homes to families of all backgrounds. We pride ourselves on helping everyone find their place in our community. How can we do that when one of our agents is caught on video telling a child he doesn't belong in a public park?" The conversation was brief and painful. Carol was placed on unpaid leave pending a full investigation. Patricia made it clear that the company's reputation was at stake, and they could not afford to be associated with discrimination of any kind. Meanwhile, David was dealing with the situation from his professional perspective. As parks director, he couldn't ignore what had happened, even though he was personally involved. He called a meeting with his staff to discuss how to turn this negative incident into a positive learning opportunity for the community. This video has shown us that we have work to do, David told his team Tuesday morning. We need to make sure all families know they're welcome in our parks. We need to address the biases that still exist in our community. David decided to organize a community forum called Parks for Everyone to discuss inclusion, bias, and creating welcoming public spaces. He reached out to local community leaders, school principals, and neighborhood association presidents to help plan the event. The response was overwhelming. The incident had struck a nerve in the community, and people wanted to talk about it. Some supported Carol, claiming she was just being protective, but most were horrified by what they had seen and wanted to ensure it never happened again. Carol spent the week in a haze of shame and anxiety. The videos had been viewed thousands of times. Local news stations had picked up the story. The headline, "Woman Confronts Parks Director's Son at Local Playground," appeared in the community newspaper with her photo prominently displayed. Her grocery store trips became exercises in humiliation. People stared and whispered. Some approached her directly to express their disappointment. A few supported her, but their comments often made her feel even worse because they revealed the same ugly assumptions she was beginning to recognize in herself. On Friday, exactly 1 week after the park incident, Carol received a letter from the city. It was an invitation to attend the community forum, along with information about a restorative justice program designed to help people understand the impact of their actions and make meaningful amends. David had specifically requested that Carol be offered this option rather than facing potential legal action for harassment. He believed in second chances and the power of education to change hearts and minds. The community forum was held the following Saturday at the high school auditorium. Over 300 people attended. David opened the event by sharing what had happened to his son and how it had affected their family. "Kevin asked me this week if he's still allowed to play at the park," David said, his voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "An 8-year-old child shouldn't have to wonder if he belongs in a public space that his own father helps manage." The audience was silent as David continued. "But this isn't just about one incident or one person. This is about all of us examining our own biases and assumptions. It's about creating a community where every child feels safe and welcome." When it was time for community members to speak, Carol slowly made her way to the microphone. Her hands were shaking and her voice was barely audible at first. "I want to apologize," she began, looking directly at David and Kevin, who were sitting in the front row. "I was wrong. I was completely wrong. I let my fears and assumptions turn me into someone I don't want to be." She paused, struggling with her emotions. "I told myself I was protecting the community, but I was really just protecting my own narrow idea of who belongs." "Kevin, you belong everywhere. You belong in that park, in this community, everywhere. I'm sorry I made you feel otherwise." The apology was met with mixed reactions. Some applauded, others remained skeptical. But it was a start. As part of the restorative justice program, Carol agreed to complete 40 hours of community service at Riverside Park. She would help with maintenance, assist with children's programs, and most importantly, attend monthly workshops on bias, privilege, and community building. 3 months later, Carol was back at the park every Saturday morning, helping to set up equipment for youth sports leagues and community events. She had met dozens of families she had never noticed before, learned their stories, and begun to understand how her previous attitudes had blinded her to the richness of her own community. One Saturday, she saw Kevin and David arrive for a father-son baseball game. Kevin ran over to her with a big smile. "Hi, Miss Carol," he said cheerfully. "Are you helping with the games today?" "I am," Carol replied, smiling back. "Have fun playing baseball." As she watched Kevin run back to his father, Carol reflected on how much had changed. The videos that had seemed like the end of her world had actually become the beginning of a new understanding. She still had work to do, but for the first time, In months she felt like she was becoming the person she wanted to be,